Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics and a little supplemental today. It was the first PMQs on a couple of fronts. It was the first sort of remotely held PMQs with the coronavirus measures, and also the first PMQs with the new Labour leader, Keir Starmer, as well. So I'd like to just go over a few thoughts on that. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So yeah, a number of momentous times, I have to say. So the situation, for those who maybe didn't watch my video earlier on today about what's happening with Parliament now. So Parliament is sitting, sort of, to carry out some business, some scrutiny. Only 50 MPs are going to be allowed in the chamber, and they'll be allocated by the Speaker of the House. There are other MPs who can engage in debate remotely, and then other MPs will just have to watch it on the telly just like I was. And it was interesting. It was really bizarre because what happens, for those who maybe haven't seen UK parliamentary procedures, is this, the Speaker stands up and he says who's to speak, and then they stand up and they ask their question, or they answer a question if it's someone who needs to answer a question. And what was happening this time is on the television. So the Speaker was standing up and calling the name of an MP, and then it was switching to their webcam in their home, because for quite a lot of them they were having to ask these questions and sometimes answer them. There were some secretaries of state answering them from their homes or offices as well. So that was quite bizarre to watch that, but it's good that it's working. It seemed to work. There were a couple of little technical glitches when I was watching it, but it largely seemed to work. Then of course we had the PMQs themselves. Now it wasn't the usual fire and fury PMQs as we would not expect. It's for a start, you haven't got a packed chamber. There's no political point scoring going on or anything like that. There's on both sides. So Keir Starmer was not up against Boris Johnson, of course, because he's not officially back at work yet. He's still officially recuperating. So Dominic Raab, as First Secretary of State, was standing in. Not the first time that they've been at each other over the dispatch box, of course, because Dominic Raab at one time was, for a very brief period, the Brexit Secretary, and Keir Starmer, of course, at that time was the Brexit Shadow Secretary. And so, yeah, but they were, they had to maintain a level of civility, of course, that is not always the case in UK Parliament. So how did Keir Starmer sort of get around this? He had to, on the one hand, ensure that he was being constructive, but on the other hand, he could not let the government get away with bullshit answers, quite frankly, pardon my French. And he gets about half a dozen, he gets 6 questions, and then that's your lot. And there were a couple of things I were looking for. Different people have been looking for different things. What I was looking for as a departure, and what I kept screaming for Jeremy Corbyn to do, even tweeting to him sometimes, there were 2 things. So sometimes Corbyn did come up with real good things to hammer the government on. The problem was, what inevitably happens, you ask your question of the Prime Minister. They stand up and deflect the answer. They answer a completely different question. They say something that's got nothing to do with what you've just asked. And they sit down. What you then need to do is go, right, you don't seem to have answered the question. Are you running scared there? Or something like that. You need to point out that they haven't actually answered the question. Because the problem is, when you let them deflect it, the supporters of the Leader of the Opposition go, oh, I asked a good question there. But the supporters of the government go, they answered the question well there. No, they didn't. They didn't answer the question. You need to point that out. So I wanted him to do that. And the other thing is, where they're not able to give an answer, you need to be able to say, you are going to answer the question. I'll come back to you. And a classic case, and I'm not going to be bashing Corbyn anymore. There's no need anymore. But one classic case was the real big thing. We have to bear in mind that we now have most of the senior positions of government filled by people who may have broken the law in 2016. It was decreed that their Vote Leave campaign broke the law. Now, that's a matter of law. That's been decided in court. And that means some individuals, as part of that campaign, must have broken the law as well. The criminal investigation, of course, has been halted because the government is halting it. And Jeremy Corbyn one time asked, what about the fact then that some of your ministers may have broken the law? Theresa May, Prime Minister at the time, simply stood up and said, I think you'll find they're appealing that, and sat back down. Fine. Then they decided to abandon the appeal. So that's it now. There is no appeal in place, and that's been the case for a long time. What I wanted Jeremy Corbyn to do was stand up and say, So they've dropped the appeal then. So what about the fact that some of your senior ministers may have broken the law? What about that then? And he didn't. And he should have kept on at it. So those were the two things I was looking for. Is that what happened? So, in a word, yes. Thank goodness. First of all, Starmer asked about testing. So Dominic Raab tried to counter with saying, well, our capacity is increasing. It's now at 40,000 a day. Because what Keir Starmer was trying to say was, you have said that you're going to get 100,000 tests a day done by the end of this month. You seem to be a bit of a way off there because we've just done 18,000 in a day. But Dominic Raab is saying with capacity. So he's dodging the notion that testing is down, to what has been. So we're testing 18,000 a day thereabouts. He says we've got the capacity to 40,000. So what we now need is for someone to go, yeah, I'm not talking about capacity. I'm talking about how many you're actually testing, because capacity is meaningless, utterly meaningless. What matters is how many you're actually testing. How many are you actually testing? Not how many can you test. And he did follow up with that. He did sort of say, look, we are going to need to know how many are going to be tested at the end of the month. And what you're going to do to get that number to 100,000, not the capacity, the number tested. So he drew the distinction between what he said, the question he asked, and what Raab answered and pointed out, you don't seem to have answered the question. And we're going to need more of that. It's not capacity, it's number carried out. And that, I say that's what I was crying out for the last few years. So, did Raab end up answering why we weren't testing to our capacity? No. But he was made to visibly and obviously refuse to answer the reason why. Starmer gave an example of a care worker, potentially needing testing. So because NHS staff and care workers are now supposed to be tested if they need it, but they're not being. So he gave an example of a care worker who, to be tested, can't just go down to the local clinic or get someone to come round and test them. They'd have to drive 45 miles away to a testing centre. These things are spread out too far. But let's say you can't drive. Well, then you're buggered, because you can't get public transport because you've got symptoms you're having to isolate. So you have no way of getting to the testing station. So it's all right, the government saying, well, we've got a test for you. All you have to do is come and get it. Come on, here, boy. Come on. I'm not very good at whistling, which is possibly why dogs never listen to me. But anyway, no point, because they can't go and get it. It's the government's responsibility to make sure that the test can be carried out where people need it carried out. As he said, direct quote, he says, this is not a very good plan. So he's absolutely not letting him off the hook. He's not going, he has to come from a position of constructive criticism of the government, but he is criticising. He didn't use any of his questions to go, oh, thanks very much, you're doing grand. No, quite the opposite. Basically, he was saying, in every question, he seemed to be doing a bit of a crap job. Would you like some help? And that came through really, really clearly. The government say they can test 40,000 a day, but they are testing fewer than half of that. And that is what emerged from it. Next, there was a question on the many NHS workers and social workers who have died from the coronavirus. And he wanted to know, what are the numbers? So Dominic Raab said 69 NHS workers have died. And he was not able to give a number for care home workers. To which Keir Starmer said that this was disappointing. But again, what did he do when presented with a Secretary of State saying, I can't answer that question? He says, right, I'm going to ask you that question next week. Which again is exactly what you want to do. You don't let them get away. Because, in a question where he's just basically gone, I don't know. It's like, yeah, well, we want to know. So we're going to ask again next week. Make sure you've got the answer then. Can you please? Which again is good, because if next week they're not being able to provide those numbers, then you will get a response that's basically, well, I asked you a week ago, you're the government. How can you not know how many people are dying? That's because you're not checking, or you don't want to know. There can be no good reason to not answer it next week, basically. When, of course, the numbers will have gone up much further. Then, of course, he asked about PPE for frontline staff. Again, used the sort of final question on that. Now, Raab did try to say that all countries are facing challenges. They come out with this thing that is, all these countries are trying to face challenges, trying to suggest the fact that everyone is struggling. But of course, that is not true. But he kept stressing the competitive nature of getting the kit. But as Starmer said, again, a quote from him, he says, there's a significant gap between promise and delivery. He highlighted the case of manufacturers who have offered supplies and have not been taken up by government. Now, he was fair on this. He did say, I can understand that just because someone says they can supply this kit doesn't mean it's of the right quality. Yes, there's a process by which you have to check the quality. But he also noted that quite a lot of these manufacturers have sent their produce now overseas. So other countries have been buying it. That means it must meet the standards. Because if they're buying it in other EU countries that have the same standards, then that means them, if they're meeting their standards, they're meeting our standards. So what's going on here? We're a bit slow here. To which he had to deny being slow. But at the end of the day, if we're not getting the kit, yeah, you are slow. And other countries are, if other countries were struggling to get the kit, you might go, fair enough. But they're not, And Rob tried to go on the attack here. I do have to say it fell down flat. He tried to suggest that Starmer was somehow saying he knew better than medical experts. But again, falls down flat because what Rob was trying to say is that they have followed all the advice from the medical experts in this country. As if to suggest that the medical experts in this country say, yeah, you don't need to order a load of PPE, we'll be fine. I don't think they've advised the government that. I really don't think they have. And also, again, even if that were the case, in that surprising event, you would still be suggesting, what about other countries then? Why do you think that your medical experts know better than all the medical experts in the world who have advised their governments to get in a load of PPE so they don't run out? Because that's what they've done. So those were the questions as they were. I was very pleased that he didn't just go through 6 different questions, because that doesn't work. You cannot just ask a question, let them deflect it, ask a second question, let them deflect that. You don't just pepper them with lots of things and hope something sticks. You hit them with one thing. When they don't answer it, you point out that they haven't answered it. And if that means you effectively only get to ask 3 questions, so be it. And if it means that they're all dodged, so be it, but you have highlighted that they're all dodged. And also, I particularly like the fact that one question that just wasn't answered at all, he is going to ask it again next week. There were then other people who asked questions. I'll go through a couple of them of interest without going through the whole lot. So Ian Blackford for the SNP, it's always worth talking about. Second major opposition party, of course, in Parliament, gets a couple of questions. He was asking about business support and universal basic income, talking about the fact that although the government announced these support measures that were going to help all businesses, in actual fact there's loads of businesses, tens of thousands of businesses have not been helped by it because they've been left out of the process due to what Blackford described as arbitrary cut-off dates and bureaucracy, which has made it, particularly for smaller business and medium-sized businesses, very difficult to access. So there's a load of people with no income at all. And he also, it was quite funny because at this point, on the first question, Rob was saying that the support for workers that the government put in place was second to none in the world. That's what he said, second to none. In other words, the best. Or there might be someone equally good, but there's no one better. That's what second to none means. Even though there are European countries that have provided more support, including a higher proportion of wages for furloughed workers. The 80% of wages, there are higher percentages than that in some countries. But then in his second reply, when Blackford again pushed the universal basic income being needed right now, he said that the support the government had put in place was one of the best in the world. So, one of the best in the world that's not the same as second to none, is it now, Mr. Rob? Maybe if he'd have got to ask a few more questions, if he'd have been allowed 6 questions, maybe by the end of it, Rob would be saying, yeah, we've got some measures, they're pretty crap, they're not, Anyway. But Rob was suggesting that in actual fact, instead of universal basic income, we should be targeting the resources to the people who need it the most. Which is fine. I'm sure if Mr. Blackford had got a third question, he would have agreed with that. The problem is that the people who need it the most are the ones who are suffering the most. They are the ones who are not getting it. That is the problem. And that is what I would have been able to add in had there been, unfortunately, Ian Blackford wasn't allowed another question there. But anyway, that was the PMQs. Very different. Obviously, it didn't have the Prime Minister there. It's not your full blood and guts ones. We're going to have to probably wait months before we get a proper feral Prime Minister's questions again. Not that I approve of the poor behaviour in them, but a very different atmosphere, much more subdued. But good that it is working. We've actually now got a functional Prime Minister's questions, even though the Prime Minister is not there for them. But fair enough, we'll wait till he's officially recuperated and then he can take part in those as well. So that's my reading of the events. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you watched it as well. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, and if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.